Hey everyone, welcome back to Conviction Bet. Hope you're doing well out there. It's been a genuinely strange week in markets. Hot April PPI data this week. Producer prices up 1.4% in a single month against a consensus of half a point, and yet the S&P 500 still closed at a record 7,444. NASDAQ hit a new all-time high. Brent crude is sitting around $106 on Iran tensions and Strait of Hormuz fears. And President Trump is currently in Beijing for a summit with Xi Jinping, where he opened by declaring, and I am quoting directly here, the U.S.-China relationship is going to be better than ever before, while Xi warned that mishandling Taiwan could put the two countries on a path to conflict. NVIDIA reports earnings on May 20th. If you've been trying to hold all of that in your head at once, you're not alone. And speaking of numbers that should raise some eyebrows, the Federal Reserve's distributional financial accounts show that as of Q3 2025, the top 1% of American households controlled 31.7% of total U.S. net worth, about $55 trillion, roughly equal to the combined wealth of the bottom 90%. Separately, Fidelity's Q4 2025 retirement analysis, based on 24.8 million 401k participants, found that the average 401k balance recently hit a record $146,400. Both numbers get reported as wealth, but one describes structural power and optionality. The other describes a retirement account balance that may still leave someone fully dependent on a paycheck. I want to step back from all of that for a moment. Most Americans are fluent in money. They check their balance. They track their net worth. They optimize their savings rate. They know exactly what the market did today. Far fewer are fluent in wealth. The market is telling a story about financial balances and inequality statistics. The real story is about why the word wealth has been quietly robbing Americans for 3 centuries and what to do about it. I'm J.L. Maurer, and this is Conviction Bet. We believe the stories that move your portfolio are usually quieter than the ones that move the tape. Here's where we're going. There is a French sociologist whose essay translated to English in 1986 should be required reading in every personal finance course ever offered, and almost nobody in finance has read it. We're going to cover what he found, why the American monetary cycle from 2020 to 2025 is one of the clearest case studies in the physics of wealth ever assembled, and why a country with one of the highest GDP per capita levels among large advanced economies just ranked 24th in the World Happiness Report. The most uncomfortable thing you're going to hear today, the fastest path to financial freedom, is usually not earning more money. Let's get into it. In Old English, the root word was weal. It meant welfare, the full condition of flourishing that encompassed health, community, and the circumstances of a good life. The suffix the turned the adjective into a noun. Wealth originally was not something you had. It was something you were. Then came the champagne fairs, Italian double-entry bookkeeping, and eventually the Industrial Revolution. And somewhere in that long materialist drift, the English language did something remarkable and expensive. It collapsed well-being into net worth. By the 19th century, the word wealth had become almost exclusively synonymous with accumulated money. The original meaning, holistic flourishing, the good life itself, survived only as a quaint archaism. Here is why that matters. When a word narrows, the thinking built around it narrows too. When an American today says she feels wealthy in time, she is reaching unconsciously for the original Germanic conception of wealth as capability, as the power to deploy resources effectively, as freedom from constraint, but she has to reach. The default meaning pulls toward the brokerage statement. The language has already stacked the deck. And here is the practical consequence. When policymakers evaluate national success through gross domestic product alone, they ignore the depreciation of social trust, environmental quality, and civic participation that GDP growth can accompany. When individuals evaluate personal success through net worth alone, they undervalue the health, the relationships, and the autonomy that constitute what anyone would actually call a good life. Think of it this way: your balance sheet is a photograph, a single frame, frozen in time. Wealth is not a photograph. Wealth is a film that never stops running. And the deepest error in popular wealth thinking is optimizing for the photograph while living in the film. We'll come back to that. Now, in 1986, a French sociologist named Pierre Bourdieu published a short essay called The Forms of Capital, originally written in German in 1983, but it is the English translation that reached finance and sociology classrooms around the world. Bourdieu was not writing for finance audiences. He was writing for sociologists studying French class structure and educational stratification. But what he produced is one of the most useful maps of wealth anyone has drawn, and almost nobody on Wall Street has read it. Here is his central argument. Money is only one of several convertible resources that determine life outcomes. And it is not always the most important one. Bourdieu's 1986 essay gives us the core map: economic capital, which is money and assets; cultural capital, which is education, taste, competence, and credentials; and social capital, which is networks, relationships, and the capacity to mobilize others on your behalf. In his broader body of work, Bourdieu adds a fourth dimension: symbolic capital, reputation, prestige, and recognized authority that converts into the others with extraordinary efficiency. The framework is not a metaphor. It is a mechanism. These four capitals are fungible. They convert into one another at exchange rates that vary by context. And the person who understands the conversion rules holds a structural advantage over the person who thinks only in dollars. Let me give you the numbers. Bureau of Labor Statistics data from 2024 shows that Americans with bachelor's degrees earn a median $80,236 annually. High school graduates earn $48,360. That is a 66% premium. And across a 40-year career, that annual gap sums to roughly $1.2 to $1.3 million in additional earnings before taxes, discounting, or the cost of education itself. The bachelor's degree functions as institutionalized cultural capital, a formal social validation that unlocks access to job markets, professional networks, and social fields that remain effectively closed to the uncredentialed. On social capital, a 2024 analysis by recruiting platform Ashby found that employee referrals represent roughly 1% of all job applications. And 40% of those referred candidates move from application to interview, far exceeding the conversion rate for cold applications. The economic returns to social capital are multiplicative. They do not add to the effectiveness of your other capitals. They determine which doors become visible. On symbolic capital, the NBER's Superstar CEOs paper found that award-winning CEOs go on to extract more compensation from their boards, not despite subsequent underperformance, but alongside it. Reputation, once established, has its own financial gravity. It pulls money toward itself regardless of whether the underlying reality still justifies it. In the most vivid illustration of how this works in the negative, Anna Sorokin, the German-Russian imposter who infiltrated New York's financial elite from 2013 to 2017, Sorokin possessed essentially zero economic capital. But she had studied symbolic capital carefully. By dressing correctly, referencing the right cultural touchstones, and projecting confidence in exclusive spaces, she induced Citibank, private aviation companies, and hotels to treat her as a legitimate member of the wealth class, extracting stays, charter flights, and banking services until the contradiction became unsustainable. Her story, while fraudulent, illustrates a genuine truth. In most social contexts, the map of wealth is what others read. The underlying territory is almost never directly observable. In the inverse, the one that should matter more to every investor listening is equally real. Research on lottery windfalls to financially distressed recipients has found that the money tends to postpone rather than prevent long-term financial difficulty. The pattern is not that money never helps. It is that cash alone often fails to create durable stability when the surrounding capabilities, the financial literacy, the trusted advisors, the social insulation are absent. The so what for an investor is this: if you are allocating your time, energy, and money exclusively to growing the economic capital column while ignoring the other three, you are not building wealth. You are building one input into a 4-factor equation and leaving 3 variables at 0. Now, let's talk about the physics. The deepest error in popular wealth conception, we touched on it at the top, is treating assets as permanent possessions rather than temporary crystallizations of larger flows. Almost no asset holds value independent of its context. A suburban home worth $500,000 in 2021 and $380,000 in 2023 did not change. The flow of credit, demographic preferences, and interest rates around it changed. Wealth moves through an economic system like water, through a watershed pooling temporarily in some locations before flowing elsewhere. And the operative question is never, how much do I have? It is, where is the flow going and am I positioned to capture it? The American monetary cycle from 2020 to 2025 is one of the clearest case studies in flow dynamics I have seen. 3 distinct phases, 3 distinct winning asset classes, and in every case, the winner was whoever understood where the flow was going before it arrived. Phase 1, 2020 to 2021. The Federal Reserve slashed the federal funds rate to 0. Congress authorized $5 trillion in fiscal stimulus. The 30-year fixed mortgage rate averaged 2.96% in 2021, a generational low. National home prices rose more than 40% from early 2020 to mid-2022. The S&P 500 gained 16% in 2020, 27% in 2021. The wealth effect was real and viciously unequal. Anyone holding real assets experienced extraordinary valuation gains. Renters and the assetless experienced exactly none of that. The liquidity flood widened the wealth gap by rewarding asset holders while bypassing everyone else. Phase 2, 2022 to 2023. CPI inflation peaked at 9.1% year over year in June of 2022, the highest reading since 1981. The Federal Reserve responded with 11 hikes between March 2022 and July 2023, taking the federal funds rate from near 0 to 5.25 to 5.5. Mortgage rates climbed from 2.96 to 7%. The S&P 500 fell 19.4% in 2022. Bond markets had their worst year on record. The housing market froze up as homeowners with 3% mortgages refused to sell and assume 7% loans, the so-called lock-in effect, collapsing inventory and transaction volumes while prices stayed sticky. Same houses, different flow, different result. Phase 3, 2024 to 2025. A new flow driver emerged. Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet, and Meta collectively spent roughly $246 billion on capital expenditures in 2024, with AI infrastructure comprising a growing share. By the second quarter of 2025, quarterly hyperscaler CapEx was tracking toward the high tens of billions, and, depending on the company set, measured toward or above $100 billion per quarter. Data center pipelines collectively exceeded $500 billion. The S&P gained approximately 23% in 2024, but the gains were heavily concentrated. The Magnificent Seven accounted for a disproportionate share. AI-linked infrastructure suppliers led. Many traditional sectors lagged the AI leaders. That is wealth as flow. 3 phases, 3 completely different winning strategies. Each required understanding, not where wealth currently was, but where it was going. And for historical confirmation, look at the subprime crisis. 2020 to 2025 was a demonstration of flow working. 2007 to 2009 was a demonstration of flow reversing. During the housing bubble of the early 2000s, American households extracted $2.3 trillion in home equity between 2003 and 2007, treating appreciation as permanent income. When the credit flow reversed, the structure unwound. The Treasury Department put total lost household wealth at approximately $19 trillion. 4 million Americans lost their homes. The Dow Jones fell from 14,164 in October 2007 to 6,547 in March 2009, a decline of more than half. The houses themselves did not change. The flow of credit around them reversed direction. Americans who understood that real estate wealth was contingent upon credit flow rather than intrinsic to dirt and lumber had a fundamentally different experience of those years. Those who treated home equity as a permanent photograph were devastated when the film kept running without them. Now let's talk about why people keep making the same mistakes. There are 4 wealth traps that recur with remarkable consistency across income levels, generations, and geographies. They are worth naming precisely, because naming them is the first step towards seeing them in yourself. The first is the signifier fallacy, the equation of wealth symbols with wealth itself. The American housing bubble was this pathology at continental scale. Millions of homeowners treated home equity appreciation as permanent wealth accumulation, extracting cash through refinancing to fund consumption, while failing to recognize that the appreciation was a temporary artifact of credit expansion. Fidelity's most recently reported average 401k balance, $146,400, as of late 2025, is susceptible to exactly the same error. That number exists only at the current intersection of monetary policy, earnings expectations, and investor sentiment. All 3 of which have demonstrated, within recent memory, the capacity to reverse sharply. The balance is not wealth in the deeper sense we have been discussing here. It is a market price claim on future flows contingent on conditions outside your control. Fidelity's own data reveals the tension. Gen X, the generation nearest retirement, carries the highest share of outstanding 401k loans of any cohort at 25.8%, even with an average balance of $222,100. The second trap is the FOMO economy. Social media has engineered a mechanism for systematic wealth destruction that targets the neurological architecture of status anxiety. Empower's March 2025 survey of over 1,000 Americans found that 57% have made a financial decision after seeing others' lifestyles online. 73% say social media has changed how they spend, save, or invest. Among Gen Z, nearly 70% experience financial FOMO while scrolling. The spending categories most affected: dining out at 21%, travel at 18%, investments at 16%, events at 15%. Each represents discretionary consumption dressed as experience or opportunity, functioning as systematic wealth leakage. The neurological mechanism is deliberate. Variable reward schedules, status comparison triggers, infinite scroll. The engagement model does not merely tolerate this kind of wealth leakage. In many cases, it monetizes the comparison loops that create it. The third trap is the experience economy. Concert tickets, international travel, gourmet dining, all routinely justified as self-investment or memory creation rather than spending. While genuine experiences do contribute to well-being, the framing obscures a fundamental distinction. Assets appreciate. Most purchased experiences depreciate financially to zero unless they build durable cultural, social, or symbolic capital. $1 invested at age 25 grows to approximately $15 by age 65 at a 7% annual return. The same dollar spent on a concert ticket is gone. The experiential justification does not alter the mathematics of compounding. It only makes the opportunity cost invisible. The fourth trap, and probably the most insidious, is the relative comparison trap. Research in behavioral economics consistently demonstrates that individuals derive more satisfaction from being wealthier than their neighbors than from being wealthier in absolute terms. A household earning $100,000 in a community where the median is 80,000 reports higher life satisfaction than an identical household earning 120,000 where the median is 150,000. Social media has expanded the comparison set from immediate neighbors to the globally visible elite, creating a perpetual sense of deprivation relative to curated presentations of extreme wealth. The Kahneman-Killingsworth study, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2023, found that emotional well-being does continue to rise with income beyond the $75,000 threshold that an earlier study had suggested. But the rate of improvement slows. And a broader well-being literature reminds us that income is only one determinant of life satisfaction, relationship quality, health, sense of purpose, and autonomy over time matter enormously. And beyond moderate sufficiency, they often account for more of the variance in how people actually feel about their lives. The solution to the comparison trap is not further accumulation. It is intentional management of the comparison frame, a practice of psychological wealth that costs nothing at all. Now, let's build something. If wealth is flow, if it is multidimensional, if the traps are engineered and the vocabulary is corrupted, what does actually building it look like? Start with the mathematics of freedom. Financial freedom is not the possession of unlimited resources. It is the alignment of resources with desires such that work becomes optional. A common rule of thumb drawn from the Trinity Studies historical portfolio analysis suggests that financial freedom requires capital equal to 25 times annual expenditures, using a 4% sustainable withdrawal rate as the baseline. An individual spending $50,000 a year needs $1.25 million. One spending $200,000 needs $5 million. The multiplier is constant. The variable is expenditure discipline. And here is the most counterintuitive implication of that math. Cutting $10,000 in annual spending has exactly the same effect on financial freedom as accumulating $250,000 in additional capital at a 4% withdrawal rate. But it can be accomplished in months rather than decades. The fastest path to financial freedom is frequently not earning more money. It is needing less of it. For intergenerational wealth, the contrast between the Rockefeller and Vanderbilt families is the most instructive case study in American financial history. Cornelius Vanderbilt amassed a fortune estimated at over $250 billion in today's terms through shipping and railroad monopolies. His dying advice to his heirs: keep the money together. They did not. Within 48 years of his death, one direct descendant died broke. By the 1973 family reunion, the oft-repeated account was that not one of the gathered descendants was a millionaire. John D. Rockefeller assembled a comparable fortune. In 1934, the family established its first major trust vehicle, managed by Chase Bank. In 1952, they created a formal dynasty trust designed specifically for multi-generational preservation. The Rockefeller system is often described as relying on professional institutional trustees, discretionary distributions based on need rather than outright principal, family governance structures, financial education, and philanthropy as a shared identity mechanism, giving successive generations a stake in the institution itself, not merely a claim on its distributions. The result? 6 generations later, approximately 170 Rockefeller heirs continue to receive income from those structures. Total family wealth is estimated, and estimates vary, but some put it at around $8.4 billion. The Rockefeller fortune did not preserve its original economic scale. That would be an impossible standard across 6 generations in 2 world wars. But the family architecture preserved a durable capital base across generations. $8.4 billion spread across 170 heirs is a story of preservation, not dissipation. And it is a radical outlier against the statistical baseline where the often cited Williams Group estimate suggests that 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth by the 2nd generation and 90% by the 3rd. The lesson is not about the amount. It is about the architecture. Vanderbilt transferred assets. Rockefeller designed a system that produced stewardship behavior among heirs. Intergenerational wealth transfer is a design problem, not a financial problem. Families that design systems succeed. Families that merely transfer assets fail. And then there is time, the most fundamental form of wealth and the one we talk about least. Americans work approximately 1,811 hours per year, according to OECD comparable data. German workers average around 1,332 hours. That is nearly 500 additional hours per year, roughly 12 extra 40-hour work weeks that American workers give to the economy and do not get back. And the return on that investment is troubling. The United States ranked 24th in the 2025 World Happiness Report, its lowest position ever recorded, despite having one of the highest GDP per capita levels among large advanced economies. The disconnect is stark. Americans generate extraordinary economic output, but capture a diminishing share of that output in the form of leisure, health, and life satisfaction. Stanford professor Jeffrey Pfeffer and co-authors estimate that workplace stressors associated with U.S. management practices may be linked to more than 120,000 excess deaths per year. The Japanese have a word for this: karoshi. Death from overwork. English has no equivalent. Dryly, that linguistic absence tells you something. The American worker is not primarily working from abundance. She is working from fear. The structural precarity of American economic life, the healthcare costs, the education expenses, the limited social safety net, the income volatility compels overwork as a defensive strategy. The goal of wealth should be to escape that trap. But the trap is engineered to look like the path to escaping it. The person who controls her time, who can choose how to spend the one resource that cannot be manufactured, borrowed, or stored, is wealthy in the only sense that ultimately matters. Now, I know what the pushback is. The bear case against everything I've said today is pretty simple. It goes something like this. Look, JL, this is all very interesting. Bourdieu is a nice framework. The etymology is clever. But you know what? More money is better. Full stop. A millionaire with no cultural capital is still a millionaire. And all this talk about temporal sovereignty and four capital frameworks is just a sophisticated way of rationalizing not being rich. That is a legitimate concern. And I want to be honest about what is correct in it. The Kahneman-Killingsworth data does confirm that income continues to improve well-being at higher levels. The earlier research suggesting a plateau at 75,000 was overstated. Money does open options. Economic capital matters enormously. And there is real privilege in being able to say, I have enough. Most Americans do not have enough. And that is a structural problem that no amount of four capital theorizing dissolves. But here is why the thesis survives it. The argument is not that money does not matter. The argument is that optimizing exclusively for one capital while ignoring the other three produces suboptimal outcomes in every other dimension of life and, over time, often in the economic dimension too. The lottery data shows it. The Vanderbilt family shows it. The happiness rankings show it at the national level. A country can have one of the highest GDP per capita levels among large advanced economies and rank 24th for well-being. An individual can have a high balance sheet in a depleted life. The photograph can be technically impressive, while the film tells a different story entirely. The goal is not to replace economic capital with cultural or social or symbolic capital. The goal is to run all four in parallel and to understand which one needs investment at each stage of your life. So here is what I take away from all of this. Build economic capital sufficient for security and optionality. Enough that you are not working from fear. Invest in cultural capital through education, skill development, and the kinds of intellectual and aesthetic richness that compound quietly. Cultivate social capital through genuine relationship and community contribution, not network optimization, but actual trust. And earn symbolic capital through competence, integrity, and consistency over time. You cannot buy it. You can only accumulate it the slow way. Run that program patiently. with compounding as your silent partner, and the financial component will follow. Your balance sheet is a photograph. Wealth is the film that never stops running. Pause. The investors who understand that, who see the currents beneath the surface, who build convertible capital rather than accumulate static assets, who define freedom as autonomy rather than abundance, are the ones who do not just own wealth. They understand it. And understanding, in this case, is worth more than possessing. Anyway, that's this week. If you prefer to read, the show has a Substack called Quiet Velocity. Find it at quietvelocity1.substack.com. That's Quiet Velocity, the number 1.substack.com. And if you're enjoying Conviction Bet, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, whatever you use. Leave a review if you have 30 seconds. It genuinely helps new listeners find the show. Until next time, stay patient, stay skeptical, and keep your eye on the quiet stuff. I'm J.L. Maurer. This has been Conviction Bet.